Welcome back to the Grouch and the Brainstorm. This is episode. Do you know what episode this is, Matt?
140.
Oh, you got it. I'll be dang. He does listen to the show.
I've gotten
Episode
two right
one.
out of 140. Yeah.
Episode 140. And we have been on a streak lately of speakers. And Matt, I think besides Rich T, our guest today, Barclay M, is the only other male that we've had tell their story.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I feel important.
Yeah. On this particular, well, when we did it in person, we had a few, but I think Barclay might be the only male that we've had. And in a sport dominated by men, it's hard to believe that, and we've had a couple lined up that fell through. But Barclay, we appreciate you being here today. We look forward to hearing this. And of course, we talked earlier before we started recording, obviously we'll do anything to prod you along and help you tell your story. You can talk as long as you want or as short as you want. Usually whenever we do this, Matt knows whoever we're going to interview or talk to and tell their story, and so he can give them a good intro. But I think this is a good, fair, level playing field, because you're a guest, and to my knowledge, we've never been in a meeting together. So who knows? That may change. You never know what you see out there in the world of recovery. So Barclay, right now you're in Lafayette, Louisiana.
That's right.
That is South Louisiana to those of us who are born and raised in North Louisiana. But a lot of folks out there don't even know the names of these towns. However, Lafayette is a little popular. I imagine people know about Lafayette more than they do about even Shreveport, because Shreveport's just so far north, which is, third biggest city in the state no one knows about. And I've met a lot of folks up here since I've been in Reno, and no one has ever heard of Shreveport, Louisiana, believe it or not.
Well, 50 Cent might put it on the map for y'all, so you might have something going on.
I know this. He's picking up a lot of property dirt cheap. I know that much. So
right.
Don't know what he's planning.
Matt's boy. That is
look,
boy.
He's my hero,
Yeah. Every time Matt sees him, he rubs two quarters together.
That's
so anyway,
right.
Barclay, we're going to go ahead, let you just start telling your story, and we might jump in and ask you a couple questions and just kind of help you along. And if we see you rolling, leave you alone and let you do your thing. But man,
Okay.
People love to hear about recovery, that it is possible. So go right ahead, jump on in.
Yeah, thanks for having me tonight. Like I said, my name's Barclay. I grew up in Baton Rouge. I guess that there's some drinking in my extended family, but not so much my immediate family. My parents didn't drink. My sister didn't drink. My brother drank a little bit and drinks a little bit now, but nobody tended to tie one on like I did growing up. But my dad was a doctor. I went to Episcopal High School. Yeah, I guess when you're in that realm, maybe it's self pressure, maybe it's felt pressure, but you kind of have this expectation on yourself that I kind of used to kind of create pressure on me to try to be somebody, and used alcohol to help me feel better about my life, my situation, the pressures of life, the uncomfortableness of just being yourself in a world trying to figure out who you are. And still today, I kind of feel a lot of that, but at least I'm doing it sober. My sobriety date is February 10th of 2019, but my first meeting was July of '06. My first drink, I remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, I literally can smell it, see the setting, and I used alcohol just to give me the courage to talk to women. That was kind of I'm shy, so let me use alcohol. I'll be funny, and this will work. And like eighth grade, I was at Brian Williams' house, White Oak Landing in Baton Rouge, and he pulls out this bottle of champagne. And his parents were coming home, and I decided, we were basically, trading it back and forth. And then when we were done, I was like, shit faced. I was like, this is amazing. And then that's where it all took off, folks. And, I drank a lot in high school. Like, my parents were pretty strict. And so with that kind of strict environment, Brian was kind of like the laissez-faire kind of family that his parents didn't really care. Well, I mean, they cared, but like, it wasn't a big deal for me to be passed out on the couch on Saturday morning and, Brian's dad waking me up, be like, hey, your dad's on the phone, wake up, like, oh shit. So there was a lot of that. I still remember to this day, Brian's dad telling me in high school that there's two kinds of people that can drink. One that can drink and one that can't drink, and you can't drink. So I've had, I felt like I've had rumors and, people around me thinking you can't drink, and yet I drank. And a lot of times I would pass out and pee on myself or throw up. That was a recurring theme a lot of the time. I would not know how to moderate, and it was rare for me to drink. The older I got, like in college and high school, well, after college, I felt like I drank a lot more and there was a lot more blacking out. But I got a DWI in high school, coming home from country club, a CCL. I'd stopped drinking like 2 hours before. It was like 1:30 in the morning. I was looking at the time, looking at the radio, and I don't know if it was me looking at the radio and a slight twitch or something, or maybe it was just the cop thinking it's 1:30 in the morning. Why is this guy on the road? So I got a DWI in 98 or 99, I believe. So it was like right after high school and going into college. I thought that was kind of a big deal. It stopped me from getting a truck. And so that was kind of like my first kind of repercussion of drinking. And so it probably slowed me down for a year or two. And then, getting into college, I joined LSU. I went to three colleges before, and then, really joined a fraternity at LSU, and then was just like, off to the races, like
Yeah.
that's where training came into play. That's where the marathon training was. And I really like to drink. And, I live to drink and drink to live. I mean, I remember like saying all these things, and then, just graduating from LSU, going into a family business. That was in 2002, and then moved up to Richmond, Virginia in 2003, and got married to, I guess, a college sweetheart, somebody I met at LSU. And we got married in 2005. And that's kind of where, living with somebody day in and day out, and she could kind of see, your alcohol, tendency made me go to my first meeting in 2006. And I don't know if she really knew what she was getting into. A lot of the times I would kind of hide it from her, but she went out of town. It was June, no, it was July of '06. And she went to go to see her parents or something. And that's when I got extremely drunk, passed out. It was World Soccer, and just, made an ass of myself. And my brother came into the house. I was like half naked on the ground. I'm not sure how much details I need to have here, but anyway, but I was, half naked on the ground, passed out, and then he walks in, and I'm like, oh my God. And I kind of knew about AA, but never really said, I should be in AA, but I always kind of had it in the back of my mind of like, this is the card I'm going to play if shit goes down. So, having your brother pick up your wife at the airport and you're half naked on the ground is a good time to probably pull out the AA card.
Yeah.
And there were times where, I would pass out drunk and she would tell me to stop drinking. So there was a lot of resistance to drinking, and this just sort of hit a breaking point. And so like the next day, I think I went to my first AA meeting. I remember getting the book. It was like Goose or something was the name in the book. And I just jumped into AA. And so that was July of '06. And, like I said, '06 to 19 is a huge gap of time of me trying to drink, me not trying to drink, me proving to myself that 3 months is good, 6 months is good. So there was a lot. I mean, the previous podcast, it was a one hit wonder. I am a, 37 hit wonder where, there were a lot of attempts, and a lot of it was, I felt comfortable in the rooms in AA, and I felt like it was desired and needed for me in the beginning. And a lot of it was I was drinking for other people too, or stopping drinking for other people. And so, fast forward to February 19th, I had a lot of different things going on in my life where my ex-wife wanted to get something signed for me to take Nola, my daughter, on a trip. And I thought she was going to come in to do some kind of, sit down and accountability, get you to, go away for a very long time. I had a friend who was telling me, there's an AA alcohol kind of convention that you should go to or something. And then my parents basically caught me drinking on the way back from New Orleans to Lafayette. And I stopped in Baton Rouge where they live. And I was kind of jumping around there, but, a lot of things happened past sobriety. But in the middle of that gap, There were a couple of big dates. June 5th of 2009 was probably my worst drink, where I stopped the longest from '09 to 14.
Mm.
And it was a drink that my wife went out of town, and there were pain pills involved where she had a surgery, and so I decided to kind of hit things a little higher, and that kind of scared the crap out of me. That really scared the crap out of me because it shows kind of what where I can go to with alcohol. And you know I don't want to say it was in an attempt or anything, but I will say I was in an extremely dark spot. And that really scared me to kind of motivate me to stop drinking for, 5 years. And so we had moved to Texas in 2009 to kind of have a shift from the family business to kind of leave that. That was a huge stressor in the middle of that. Then we get to Texas in 2009, and I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. She's had enough of me by this time. And, there's been, like I said, some starting and some stopping. At this moment, I was still sober. And in 2015, was it 2015? I don't know. It was a couple years when we got back into Texas. I decided to have a drink. And then that's where it kind of, I was able to, I don't know, stop it for a little bit, not let it get out of control. But soon after, it kind of got out of control. We ended up, separating a few times in Texas. And then basically in 2015, we had our daughter, and then she basically moved back to Lafayette. And then I moved back here with her to basically have a relationship with my daughter. So from 15 to 19 was some pretty big drinking going on because there was the stress of a baby, a divorce was lingering over me. I didn't really want to be here because my wife, ex-wife, moved pregnant to Lafayette. So there was a lot of, I was just mad at the world. I wasn't successful in life. And so that really kind of got me to a very dark spot. And I kept drinking, mind you, with a daughter involved. And so there would be times where, and I'm not proud of any of this shit, but there'd be times where I would go to the gas station and have her, in the back seat going to get alcohol. And I did that a few times. And then there was a few times where I was picking her up, probably still drunk from the night before, to go take her to school or to pick her up for the weekend. And so, I mean, there was a lot of, and I'm surprised that, my ex-wife, Allison, did not say anything or smell anything, because there was, I mean, one of the craziest things I did was I came home after drinking heavily, left the car on, rolled the garage down with the car running, woke up the next morning,
Hmm.
opened up the door, and then like the fumes like set
Oh,
off all the alarms. I'm like, shit, like, so I
Yeah.
started
uh,
throwing alarms, and I'm like, I literally almost killed myself in it. And there was lots of those stories. And so it's so hard to kind of sit down and talk, even in an hour, about just your journey from drinking to not drinking. But I knew that when I had Nola in 2015, that I didn't want to, I knew that I could not control myself. I couldn't guarantee an outcome when I started drinking. And that was kind of like the non-negotiable for me, is like, I have to stop drinking or I'm going to end up losing my daughter. And so that kind of, hit me in 2019, where, like, I remember the first drink and the last drink very vividly. I think it was a Saturday night. I walked into a daiquiri place. I'd had a few beers on the way home. I'd had a few beers at home. And then I was like, I'm gonna go get fucked up. And so I walked into this daiquiri joint, and there's this black guy with a friend, and we literally got drunk all night long and stayed up till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I'm driving around, and it just like hit me where, this is some crazy behavior. And this is, you have to grow up. You have a child. Like, it's not just about you. And so that was hard for me to kind of realize that. So, like any alcoholic does, there were two more beers in the fridge that morning, and I drank the last two beers. Like, I can't throw beer out. I've got to drink the last two beers. And I drank the last two beers. Basically said, all right, I've got to quit drinking. And so I had a sponsor in Richmond when I started the steps and did the steps. So I, did that in AA, and then I moved to Houston, did the sponsorship, and, did that, and then moved back to Lafayette, to Louisiana, and had a sponsor. And so I always had a sponsor. And in the last year or two, the last, some of through sobriety, from today to 19 have been some of the hardest moments in my life that I have stayed sober. And so that is probably some of the most proudest I have been to be able to stay sober with the shit that's going on in my life. And I'm not sure how much I should say, but I dated an ex-girlfriend that was extremely toxic, and she made up some stuff about me, and I ended up losing my daughter in custody. And it's a conversation that I'll always remember, or not having, but getting a voicemail from my attorney. We were in kind of going through a custody agreement or whatever, and then this ex-girlfriend made up wrong information. And for me to stay sober during that was extremely difficult. I'm dealing with bad investment, a bad movie investment where there's another attorney involved, which is extremely stressful right now. And I'm staying sober through that. And so through all of the stops and starts, I think the biggest thing I could say is if you're going to try to stop drinking, make sure you have a why, make sure you write it down, and make sure you remember your last drink, and make sure you know why you're doing it. Because unless you want to stay sober for yourself, it's going to be extremely difficult to stay sober for somebody else. And having a child is kind of different than a friend or a dad. I understand that, but she, I didn't want to lose her, and then having losing custody of her was the worst time of my life. But at the same time, I was so proud that I was able to stay sober and go through that, because I said, I'm not losing Nola over alcohol, and I'm sure as hell not losing her over sobriety, not drinking. Like, that's just, it was extremely
Yeah.
difficult to go through that and to stay sober through that, because that was probably the closest I'd ever been to drinking. And that was probably 4 years ago. So 2021. And like I said, I'm dealing with a bad movie investment right now that happened earlier this year. It's kind of stressful. It's a lot of money, but yet I'm not drinking because I know myself, and it's taken a while for me to kind of get to that point of kind of the foundation of to thy own self be true. And I didn't really know myself. And now I know myself better, and I know what I can and can't do. And so it's just allowed me to kind of have that freedom to go to Vegas by yourself and, be on the 63rd floor of the Trump Hotel, and then have some Dave Matthews on in your Bose radio, and then drinking some Heineken zero point zero and overlooking, the strip. And I'm like, this is so amazing. I mean, I'm not here for drugs, alcohol, or prostitution, but I'm sober. I'm looking at that. That's pretty freaking cool, like,
Yeah.
and it's empowering to like go to concerts by yourself. And I never thought that I could do that, but yet here I would always make fun of the dudes that, like, weren't drinking. It's like, oh, he's freaking sober. What a fucking loser. And here I am, busting up my, zero point zero Heineken, and, or drinking water at a concert. And I'm like, I used to make fun of these people, and here I am. And so I don't know. It's been an amazing journey. It's been a difficult journey. It's been a hard journey. But, and I still use the steps and principles. I don't go to AA meetings in a while. I hadn't been in a while. And now, after doing a podcast 2 weeks ago and now this, I'm like, maybe I should dip back into AA just for shits and giggles. And that's kind of how I got to here with you guys, is maybe I just went to the wrong meetings. But every time I got personal or open or honest at an AA meeting, it brought constructive criticism and feedback. And in my world, being in a family business, having a doctor as your dad, and being lost most of your life and not knowing your purpose, you don't need critics in your life. You need cheerleaders. And I did find some cheerleaders, and I found, I had a great sponsor in Houston, and I had a pretty good sponsor here, but his grand sponsor was very critical of me. I went to go work in a treatment facility, and he thought that was a terrible idea. And if I would have told somebody that I was, going to Vegas by myself, they would have said that's a terrible idea. And a few times I mentioned that I was drinking non-alcoholic beer, and they just thought that that was like a red flag, or you're on slippery slope here. And I'm like, you know what? All that does is motivate me to kind of show you that I can do it, and I'm going to, prove to you that I can do it. And it's kind of that rebellious, black sheep kind of attitude. But there's still times when I still think about it a little bit, but it doesn't have the power like it once did. And so it took me a little while each time when I stopped drinking to kind of stay in that realm of that accountability of getting sober, and to have those meetings and to have just that accountability. And now I've kind of reached back out to my therapist because of all the things going on now, that I'm like, you know what? I think I need to see my therapist now. We're in some kind of slippery slopes with life again, of a major life kind of happening that has been extremely stressful. I went to rehab in 2014 for another addiction, and I stay in touch with two of those people to kind of talk through that. Knowing this is alcohol, I'm going to focus on that. But the ex girlfriend used that addiction to kind of make up some stuff that really was awful. And that was extremely difficult and painful. I kind of brought that to myself. But anyway, I still kind of talk to those rehab folks. I have an old man who's 87 in Richmond, Virginia, who's kind of my mentor that I still talk to directly. He had a brother who was in AA that was sober. And so he was kind of a person, that I open up to and say anything and everything to. He's been very helpful. And so I try to have those kind of support systems is in play if I feel squirmy or if I'm having a bad day or something to kind of reach out to. But, maybe I should go give AA another shot because that, like I still use the principles of AA. I mean, I said this the other night. Some girl said she wanted to meet me in New Orleans. So, like, the next day, I booked a hotel and told her I was coming to New Orleans next week. And she ghosted me. And then I was like, you know what? I think I might have rubbed her the wrong way. So I'm going to apologize and say I'm sorry for maybe seeming too fast. You make amends to somebody that you feel like you've wronged. And maybe, I don't know if I did or did not, but I felt like that was the right thing to do. And so, I still make amends. If I'm going to mess up, I try to make that right, I guess, in a way. Anyway, that's kind of my story in a short capsule of jumping around a little bit. I don't know. I feel more comfortable than I've ever been sober right now. And so that's a good feeling.
It is.
And there's hope for people that want to explore not drinking. And I'm never going to talk bad about AA. Maybe it's not for me, I guess, but it's for a lot of other people. And it's helped me in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different moments. That's
Take
kind
what
of
you want and leave the rest,
Yeah, I'm
what's up.
glad you brought up the part there about, and I have been very blessed to attend some really good, really good groups in several cities in the U.S. The main two would be the one where Matt, he goes there in Bossier City, and of course, there's going to be that. I don't know. It's almost like church where I used to call them the biddies, that would sit there and judge everyone that came in the
Yeah.
room and stuff. And I tell you, one of my first meetings, I got sober in June of 11, and it was probably July. And I was at a noon meeting one time, and there were two people that if I hadn't have been so bad off, and I
Yeah.
probably would have just left and never came back. But at that point, my life was on the line. It was pretty bad. And
Yeah.
and so I just kind of sucked it up and went through it. And later on, years later on, like a decade later,
Yeah.
I would actually, be friends with these people and never
Yeah.
mention what had happened during some of
Yeah.
those meetings where you get that criticism that, my sponsor, and I guess, I don't know if he knows he's still my sponsor, but my sponsor is a guy named Joe B out of Bossier City. And one of our podcasts is actually titled this, but it's the most useless commodity in the world is unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
And that sometimes we tend to over care. To be
Yeah.
quite honest with you, I've seen people come and go and come and go, and you never know who is going to stay and who's not,
Yeah.
and if you ask me for some suggestion or something, I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
If you don't ask me for one, you're still my friend. You know what I mean? Kind of
Right.
thing. And hey, I'm here. I would much rather someone feel comfortable picking up a phone and calling me and saying, "Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
this is what's going on," than someone avoiding me and not, you know what I mean? So
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, but also glad you brought up playing the AA card, because I'm gonna tell you, my first my first meeting was in the year 2000.
Yeah.
And I think I was married. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and my wife would just, it was pretty constant that she was
Yeah.
going to leave or something. And I played that AA card for 11 11 years, man. I,
You're
every
a
time
damn professional poker player at that
Yeah.
point.
she would leave, I'd go to AA or go to a rehab
Yeah.
or what, you know how it is, man. Them same kids though are,
Yeah.
God, my 27 or 26 and 29 now. So
Right. I think I needed to go to rehab I kind of was hoping that when I got out of rehab that it would kind of change things. Once you've done so much, it's hard to once you break trust, it's hard to gain trust back. And I'm not going to say it was her fault that she left or whatever. I gave her a lot of reasons to leave, and it wasn't unfaithful, but there was addictions that were involved that made her break trust. And when you have a Match.com email that pops up on her laptop when you're going to Celebrate Recovery to try to somehow keep this together, it's extremely difficult after the alcohol, the pornography, and then you have these kind of emails on the laptop. It's extremely difficult to come back to that and to win that round.
Yeah.
And, physically I never cheated, but there was definitely some emotional cheating that, it was hard to overcome. And so I tried, and it was a serious pressure of moving back from Houston to be back in Lafayette. We lived in the same house to try to raise her. She's milking the baby, and I'm trying to, be mature, and I'm not very mature.
Mm.
There's very few moments where I am mature. She just got to a point where that email just sent her over the edge, and I don't blame her, and I don't blame her at all. And so, that was hard. That was extremely difficult, and that kind of jump started drinking heavily. And then, obviously, fast forward to Nola being a little bit older, just I couldn't do it anymore. But there was a lot of shame involved, and the biggest thing in AA is it's easy to compare yourself out of situations of people's what they're going through, but the feelings are the same, the thoughts are the same, the anxiety, the pressure, the toxicity, or the depression. Those feelings are the ones that kind of, if you focus on what you have in common, you have more in common than you realize in these rooms. And so it's much like a church or kind of like a hospital. We're all sick, and you have to be aware that we're all sick, and some of us are sicker than others. And I don't know. I guess I got very sensitive about somebody coming to tell me something after something I shared, because you want to feel safe, you want to feel comfortable, you want to feel like you could say anything,
Right.
anything at all, and then nobody's gonna, look at you funny or come tell you something at the end of the meeting, and at that point you're like, you know what? I don't need this. And so, you decide not to go, but I don't know.
I had that similar thing and talked to my sponsor about it. And we kind of have sponsor and I talks, and we have sharing a meeting talks or categories. And
Yeah,
a lot of times I go through him first and
yeah,
I'll say, hey, this is going on. A lot of times the really tough stuff, he
yeah,
and I talk about it and it never comes up in a meeting specifically, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And I try in a meeting to focus on the solution, but I also know people, I've been in there, Mike has, y'all have, man, people just going through it and they're like, man, I
yeah,
got to get this out. And
yeah.
man, just get up and give them a hug, leave them
Mhm.
alone. You don't have to.
Right.
Mike's sponsor has been sober for about 365 years, I think. And I sit right beside him. We had this situation and he popped up, and he's a very soft spoken man, quiet voice.
Yeah,
He doesn't. And someone came along those lines, kind of wanted to chirp a little after a meeting, and he looked real quiet at her and he said, I find it best if I just mind my own fucking business. And then he
Yeah.
just walked off. And I
Sounds like
went,
me.
that's how you do it right there. It ain't nobody's
exactly.
business. You let them say what they need to say. None of us in there should be
Yeah,
commenting on somebody else's stuff.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, you're going to have people that are going to be them, and it's, personality are going to be extremely difficult to deal with, but it's principles over personality. That was just extremely hard for me to accept and swallow. But
And
I was always,
I'm glad you're bringing this up, because we started this for people that are struggling. Mike's idea was, hey, new person be able to listen to this as a resource. We've had
yeah,
people that are not AA people. We've had all kind of, so
yeah,
we want people to hear you can recover, and there are a lot of ways to do it. We're not, neither one, Mike nor I,
yeah,
are just AA is the only way. You'll never hear us say that, I don't think.
yeah,
Man, whatever works for people. You were talking about doing the NA beers and all that stuff. I have a friend in Mississippi that was a bartender for like 15 years and he got sober. He's been
yeah,
sober almost 10 now, still a
yeah,
bartender. Pours
yeah,
drinks every day. I couldn't do that shit. I
I don't
would
think
not
I
be able to
could.
sit behind a bar every night and pour
No,
drinks
no.
and hang out and listen to bands. But he does, man, and that's what he
Yeah,
does. And I'm like, God bless you, man. Do your
yeah.
thing. And he's a great guy. God bless him, but that ain't for Matthew, I can tell you.
I would never say to go my way. I would say you have to go your journey because, let's face it, 2006 to 2019 is a big, that's a large gap of, research and development.
Yeah.
and
Years.
so, and so I'm not going to, endorse my own story, but, my own story had to have all these breaks and breakthroughs and up and valleys and mountains and hills. I'm hard-headed, I'm stubborn, like I had to prove that I could drink, and I did that a lot. I'm going back and looking at, we went to, this is funny, we went to St. Patty's Day in Ireland, and that was in a sober part. And I was like, but I planned it in a drinking part, and so we get to the sober part of the drinking plan, and I'm like, well, this is kind of sucks,
You screwed that
We-
up, didn't you?
we- so I'm like,
Long way away.
what, Guinness? I mean, St. Patty's Day. This is like a alcoholic's dream. And so I went the whole trip without drinking. And on the flight back, you could get free alcohol because you're flying, cross country, across the Atlantic. And I'm like, do you want anything to drink? I was like, yeah, I'll take a beer. I'm sure that pissed her off. And I was like, it's like you go so long that you gotta like, go drink to make up for lost time. And I did that a lot where I'd stop and then I'd be like, I gotta make up for the 4 or 5 years I didn't drink. So let me pound this often and all the time. And there were so many times where I was drinking and like some shit really could have gone sideways when the family business was pods, and so I was operating
Mhm.
pods trucks, delivering pods drunk from the night. I wrecked a pods truck in Lafayette. I wrecked a pods truck in Lafayette from a girl breakup where I was staying up too late drinking, and I was so scared about, you know after the incident. I drove from Sulphur to New Iberia, which was a long trip, and I was getting tired, and I was pretty sure the alcohol was out of my system. And I was like, man, if they do a piss test or a, BAC test or, breathing thing or whatever, I'm screwed. And so I was trying to go as slow as I could from incident to car. For insurance reasons, you got to go and blow in and do all that. And I'm like, I blew, and I was just like, man, if this is 0.001 or, I'm fucked. So,
Yeah.
well, but luckily it was zero point 0.0, and I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And so they thought that, I was texting and driving, but I was like, no, I fell asleep. And there's been so many incidents where I was operating a truck and had a tie down bar on the side of the steps that I didn't put inside the truck that fling off on the interstate.
Mm.
I mean, I've passed out in reverse, hitting cars and at LSU. I mean, like so much drunk stories that there's drunk story after drunk story, and it just hit me that like I knew that it was almost like a toxic relationship. Man, this is fun, but this is really messing up my life, and that's where it kind of hit me of, I have to stop or I'm going to have some really, really hard consequences of being a father and losing her to your own selfishness of drinking. And it was a light bulb. It came on, and I was like, this is the right thing. And it's kind of like I got paranoid because I felt like this pressure with the wife and the friend and my family. And this is where my mind went. This is kind of weird to say, but like I was going to be like grabbing Nola, running out the door to like get away from everybody, like that's where my mind was. I went to this like paranoia place that like I'm going to lose her and I'm going to have to like grab her and take her, from these people from getting me. And so I was like, okay, I'm really out there now. This is really taking a hold of my life. And since then, when I quit so I owned the Pods franchise in Richmond, and I came and worked here, and I was a driver here, which is extremely different to be an owner than be a driver. But my dad was part owner of this franchise, and so we knew the owners really well. And so he was an alcoholic, and I would post about my sobriety on Facebook And it ended up helping a lot of people because I was pretty open and honest about sobriety and addictions. So I'd mentioned alcohol like two previous posts. On this post, I talked about pornography and alcohol, and that just rubbed him the wrong way. And I was just like, you know what? Fuck you, I'm out. So I ended up being like, are you mad at me for being honest on Facebook? Like, there's better, you got better stuff to be. I mean, he really embarrassed me a lot. And so that was kind of my sticking point of, I like helping people on social media or talk about alcohol on social media and have people message me. And one of my friends to this day says, he just told me this a few weeks ago. My ex-girlfriend is still sober because of your efforts to keep her sober, because if she reached out to you because of your own alcohol journey. So every sobriety, anniversary, I have a quick blurb about it, or sometimes I'll, like I said, post a Heineken zero point 0.0 at the Windsor Court overlooking the Mississippi River, or Vegas overlooking the strip, or whatever, or just have some kind of realization of, hey, it's nice to go to the Woodlands and see Dave Matthews and be in the pit and like have some water and like be sober, and that shit kind of shows people that, like, hey, if he can do it, then like maybe I can do it,
We do
like
recover, man. We
yeah, it
recover. So
it gives people hope to see other dumbasses be sober.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I'm a huge fan of anybody trying to stay sober because I understand the depression and the loneliness and the anxiety that takes, that you have to commit regardless of losing custody to your daughter or losing 50 grand in a movie and not getting it back and having some serious stress, which is pretty uncomfortable to go through. But you're just committed. You're like, you know what, I'm gonna raw dog this. I'm gonna stay
Mm.
sober through this shit. I know that this is not gonna help. I know that alcohol will not I mean, it's not alcohol, but you know what I'm saying. I know that booze will not change anything. And so once you kind of commit, it's a defining moment. And it was a defining moment on February 10th. And it stuck. But you have to be mindful and aware on a different level of yourself to understand what you can do and not do, and understand if you can go to Jackson and see Dave, or go to Houston and see Need to Breathe, or go to Vegas, or, do whatever, you know, the foundation is to thy own self be true. And you really, I mean, you can't do that 95%. You got to do that 100%. Like, you can't do it 50%. You do it 50%, then you're going to wind up drinking. And so a lot of that research and development has given me a very strong thesis that, like, I cannot drink, properly. And so I don't know. I hate to say it, but I'm kind of grateful for the journey. I'm grateful for all the pain, and I'm kind of grateful for where it got me today.
That's where the growth comes in. I went through a divorce in sobriety and was married and went through a little bit of crap. And I remember my brother, who's not one of us, and I remember going, "You know how hard this is to,
Yeah.
you know, oh, poor me. I'm trying to stay sober and I got to deal with this crazy woman and all that stuff." And he looked at me, he goes,
Yeah.
"Bro, do you not think everybody else goes through divorce? Like they deal with
Yeah.
crazy women like we all do it, bro. Just
Yeah.
what are you doing?" And I'm
Right.
like, "Oh, I thought I was so special and unique, that no one
Yeah.
understands what I'm going through." And my sponsor, I talked to him in that same time frame. We were going fishing, we were riding his truck. I'll never forget it. And I said, "Look at all this stuff that she's doing
Yeah.
and how I feel. And I just don't know if I can handle
Yeah.
it or not." And he said, "You're going to handle it. You're going to take it." And he said,
Yeah.
"You're just going to shut your mouth and take it." And I said, "Why do I have to do that?" And he said, "Because you can." And I
Yeah.
just sat there and I went, "What the hell does that even mean?"
Yeah.
But he was right,
Yeah.
and now life is a whole other life going on. And if I'd have thrown it into the wind. And
Yeah.
and so I try now when those things happen to go. I just had some real news about my youngest grandbaby like an hour before I walked in here. She's got a medical thing going on. And
Right.
I've stopped and thought about it and sitting here with you guys, and I'll be there to support. I don't have no control over it. I
Yeah.
can lend a hand and help, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to drink. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to do. But that, I think we all have that journey. I know Mike's been through a lot of stuff in sobriety as well. And man, that's where the growth comes and the not panic, and you
Yeah.
just go, this is life's up and downs.
Yeah.
And we think we're special as addicts and alcoholics that we have to deal with. No, it doesn't, brother. Everybody
Yeah.
deals with it, and it took me a little while to realize that. So,
Well, you bring up a great point. Is you have folks that sometimes have the victim mentality, and I hate saying that word because I try not to say it or even be it. Some of it was pretty crappy, and some of the stuff that I mentioned was kind of done to me. But I also did a lot to myself,
Mm.
where having rehab paperwork sent and given to the ex girlfriend probably not a good idea. Investing in a movie with somebody you never met or knew for a while is probably not a good idea, and so a lot of what a lot of this is something that it sucks that you got it to that, that happened, but some of it you did to yourself too. And so it's like you can't, but also you're not the only one that goes through shit too. Like we all go
yeah,
through stuff. And so, you have to be able to understand that we all have our own stuff. Some people are just more honest and forthcoming about it, like
yeah,
myself, maybe. So, but I don't know. I always like to say you can get better or you can get bitter. And I think a lot of people who really know me really well would probably understand why I would get bitter, but that's just not something that I want to play or do. And I don't want to blame any of this on anybody. I know your environment that you grow up in has a lot to do with how you are. So there is that kind of side of things. But there's also that responsibility that this is your life, this is your world, this is your choices, these are your actions, these are your consequences. And so I try to steer away from, "Well, fuck you, or you did this, or why'd you, and you can play that card. You can. You probably have a good position to play it and a good right. I don't, I feel like you have to take accountability and responsibility and become an adult and realize we all have it kind of shitty, but we all have a responsibility to move past it and be a mature adult, which
yeah,
is the serenity prayer.
Yeah, it
God
is.
grant me the serenity to accept a thing. I mean, it's acceptance is a very hard mofo to crack.
yeah, yeah,
Like to accept, and I don't know, the full serenity prayer. That was one of the two things. I've got 12% on here. I'm gonna try to wrap this up soon.
Okay, man.
I did two things in life that were like so unselfish of me. One of them was give a signed shirt to somebody away, and the other one was give my full serenity prayer to somebody in rehab, where I'd carried this full serenity prayer, I don't know, a long time, and I referenced it, and then he just grabbed it like, man, I appreciate that. And I was like, I was not going to give that to you, but I think you needed that more than I did. So I'm gonna let, but I mean, I had that in so many different wallets and carried it. And I love, just reasonably happy in this life and the net. And so I'm just, there's so much in the extended serenity prayer that just, I love reasonably happy because I'm not supremely happy. I'm reasonably happy, like I think that's life. You got to be reasonably happy. You're going to have some crap. You're going to have some angering situations that test your patience in life, but it's up to you to be able to overcome it. And so you can talk about it to somebody else.
yeah.
So anyway,
Well, thank you for coming on, man. It was great. I know you were like, I don't know what to say, man. You did fantastic, and
Yeah, we appreciate it,
I, ju-
Barclay.
I jumped around a lot, but I
I've
think you
jumped
got the
around my
point.
whole life. That's all I do. So you're good, man. You're
Hey, the
good.
first time Matt told his story in public,
Yeah.
how long, Matt? 3, 4 minutes?
No, no, maybe 15.
I don't think you made it 15.
I'm giving
It was
myself extra credit for commercials too. Commercial breaks.
so. Hey, good job. We do appreciate it. We appreciate it, and to hear everyone's recovery story gives
Yeah.
everyone hope. There is a recovery story out there, so
Sure.
I
Yeah.
do appreciate it. And
Yeah.
Matt, you got anything?
That's it, man. Just thank you for coming on, and I know that the people that listen to this are going to like your story, and
Yeah.
a lot of relation there for me too. And I've been in that LSU party scene a little myself, so it's almost
Yeah.
like the Ireland St. Patrick's Day, but it's every day of the year down there. So
to live in an environment like this where there's festivals and reasons to drink.
Oh,
I mean, to go to New Orleans as many times as I have, a little part of me is I have a cheap discount on Windsor Courts. That's why I go there and stay there, even though it's a very nice hotel. I get 50% off because I lied and told them I was an attorney, which I'm not. But anyway, but I'm on the balcony overlooking and I see the drunk bus, and it's like, thanks for carrying the football for me, guys. Thanks for
Yeah.
continuing the journey of the party. And it's like, hell yeah. And it's just some of it is like a euphoria of being around it or seeing the drunk people or going to Vegas and seeing the drunk lobby in the morning after and just kind of being grateful that you're not having this huge drawn out drunken fight or don't know where your hotel room is or got locked out or I'm just like, I am so glad I'm not there. It
I
creates
had
this like
the mentality in South Louisiana. I had a good group I went to high school with down there, lived down there in high school, and I get sober and I'm an adult and been, years since I've seen my high school buddies. And one of them calls me, he's like, "Hey man, I heard you went to rehab and all this." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And we hadn't talked and we're catching up. I said, "Yeah, man, alcohol and pills were killing me. They were killing me."
yeah.
And he says, "So you're sober and all this?" And I had like 9 months sober. And I'm like, "Yeah, 9 months." And he goes, "That's good, man." And he just sat there for a while and he goes, "You drink beer though, don't you?" And I was like, "That's alcohol." And he goes, like, that's a whole other mentality of folks down there.
It
Like, beer
is.
doesn't
Yeah.
count,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
liquor. So
Yeah.
I'm like,
That's
nobody.
funny.
Oh, it's all of it. So
Yeah.
anyway, but
That's
man, thanks
funny.
for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Barclay,
Thanks
I
for
do
having me.
appreciate it. Matt, thank you. And from Lafayette, Louisiana, and Bossier City, Louisiana, and Reno, Nevada, we have been the Grouch and the Brainstorm.